Welcome, you're on the Fringe Show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live every Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe helps you to navigate the rapidly changing world and increase the odds of your success. Here I discuss technology, startups, entrepreneurs, and mental models of successful people so that you too can take advantage of the opportunities in the new digital world. Usually, I talk about technologies that benefit and advance humanity. I talk a lot about, say, Web 3.0, blockchain, NFTs recently, crypto art, and so on and so forth. But today, I'm going to talk about a somewhat controversial technology, or rather a bunch of technologies related to what we call cognitive warfare. I have one particular motivation for the show. I can see that there are people around me, their friends and colleagues and even family members, and they have made or making very bad decisions based on kind of the official reality manufactured for them through some of the cognitive warfare mechanisms. Let me remind you, it's a live show, so please allow Facebook to identify you. And as usual, it's a disclaimer here. It's not financial advice, investment advice, or health advice, or any sort of legal advice. All I'm doing on the Fringe Show is for informational and educational purposes. So I will start with what cognitive warfare is, its impact, consequences, implications, also how to avoid it, how can we protect ourselves, how can we make better decisions on the kind of the right understanding of reality. I'm using quite a number of documents here. One of them is this big report on cognitive warfare. I'm quoting a few things from here. It's from NATO website. You can go and basically have a look yourself. NATO, generally speaking, writes a lot on cognitive warfare, both reports and academic papers. And there is an academic paper from, in particular, the director of the Innovation Hub. His name is Ducluzel, and another author, Bernard Claverie, and a number of others. They're just generally reports from mostly military and mostly NATO. This concept itself comes from the military, quite obviously. So what is cognitive warfare? Let me start with this quote from the paper, the research paper, that says that cognitive warfare is now with us. The main challenge is that it is essentially invisible. All you see is its impact, and by then it's often too late. And then there is a very famous saying by Professor James Giordano, who said that the brain represents the new battlescape of the 21st century. So let's see what cognitive warfare is. It's really a strategy that focuses on altering how the population, that is you and me, think, and through that, how we act. It's an unconventional form of warfare, and it uses cyber tools to alter individuals' cognitive processes. It also exploits our mental biases and reflexive thinking and provokes a kind of thoughts distortion, if you will. It influences our decision-making and hinders actions with negative effect, both on the individual and collective levels. Cognitive warfare goes beyond just information. It is very closely related to information warfare, but it's not just about distorting information, misinformation, disinformation, and things like that. But it's really targeting what individuals' brains will do with this information, or how our minds and brains process this information. And in a war, it is a war where on what the enemy thinks, really, loves or believes in, and that's generally by altering perceptions. It's a war on how the mind works, how it sees the world, and develops conceptual thinking. Now, the key to cognitive warfare is this changing the perception of reality. And it's by no means it's a new concept. There was a gentleman back in the 80s, and his name is Yuri Bezmenov. He's very widely quoted recently. And there are some statements that he made back in the 80s. Yuri Bezmenov was an ex-KGB spy. He was a journalist, but that was his second job, I believe. And he eventually defected to Canada. So he was very much in the thick of it. And this is how he describes how the process of changing the perception of reality works. He's referring here to the US because the US at the times of the Cold War was of course, the largest adversary of Russia. This is what he's saying. And he's referring to ideological subversion. What this ideological subversion basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interest of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. And there is another quote which I found particularly disturbing. This is what he says. They, referring to the Americans, are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. He's alluding to Pavlov. You cannot change their mind even if you expose them to authentic information. Even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. Yuri Bezmenov is also famous with coming with so-called 4 stages of ideological subversion. So it's a rather long process, and he says that it starts with demoralization, where you educate an entire generation in a totalitarian ideology or some alien ideology, which is different from yours. And that usually takes 15 to 20 years because that's how it takes to educate a new generation of people. Then there is a period of destabilization of about 2 to 5 years when you destabilize economy, foreign relations, and defense systems. Then comes the phase of crisis. Crisis is very fast and short. It's usually about 6 weeks, according to him, where where you can see violent change of power, of structure, and economy. And finally, it's the period of normalization. And it's a little bit of a deceptive term. This is kind of the new normal, where your country or your community is literally taken over, and you're living under a new ideology and a new reality that's imposed to you from above. So I think that there is a lot of interesting thoughts here explaining how cognitive warfare can change the perception of reality. With cognitive warfare, what we see is weaponization of neuroscience. It draws a lot on neuroscience and technology, and neurotechnology as well. It involves hacking the individual by exploiting the vulnerabilities of the human brain in order to implement these more sophisticated social engineering techniques. Generally, we know in warfare there are traditional operational domains of air, land, sea, space, and cyber. Now that's a 6th one, the human domain that they have added. And the cognitive warfare's objectives is really to make everyone a weapon. This is a little bit frightening, but this is what their documents themselves are saying. And the objective of cognitive warfare is to harm societies and not only the military, again, from their own documents. So what are the goals and targets? The goals and targets of cognitive warfare, as far as the goals go, destabilization, increase polarization in society, delegitimize governments, leadership, isolate certain individuals or certain groups, disrupt infrastructure, key economic activities, and generally confuse communication. Then there is influence, which is targeting political, economic, academic, religious, and social leaders. And they are like vectors of influence, and they're reaching to a wider audience to promote all these extreme ideologies manipulate beliefs, control key economic activities, recruit civilians to all these marginal radicalized groups. It's also to attack, degrade, and destroy how somebody or someone rather builds own reality, mental self-confidence, develops trust and processes and approaches required for the efficient functioning of groups, societies, and nations. The targets are, well, they're everyone and anyone. They can be individuals, leaders in politics, religion, in economy, academics, connectors, mavens, what have you, and groups and whole populations. Cognitive warfare can motivate people to act in ways that can disrupt or fragment an otherwise coherent and cohesive society. So what are the means and enablers? Well, it's largely a product of a bunch of technologies, but prominent of them, amongst them, are social media and social media phenomenon. And that's because of their business model associated with, by the way, Web 2.0, based on accessing the constant attention of the human brain. It's all about attention, 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 and eyeballs. So it's information, psychological and social engineering technologies, plus social media, social networking, messaging, mobile devices, social media influences, selective release of documents, video sharing, all of that is enabling cognitive warfare. Plus, of course, cyber capabilities are helping too, with spear phishing, hacking, and tracking individuals and social networks. Today, what we can see are massive investments in neuroscience by state and corporations, and that's all also enabled by hyperconnectivity, big data, and the so-called NBICs. What are NBICs? It's a cluster of technologies standing for, the acronym stands for nanotechnology, biotechnology, information technology, and cognitive sciences. And one of the documents from NATO, from the reports that I just quoted, refers to what we're witnessing today as an embedded fifth column. And that's what they're saying in their report. Today's progresses in nanotechnology, biotechnology, information technology, and cognitive sciences, NBIC, boosted by the seemingly unstoppable march of a triumphant troika made of artificial intelligence, big data, and civilizational digital addiction, have created a much more ominous prospect, an embedded fifth column where everyone, unbeknown to him or her, is behaving according to the plans of one of our competitors. They're, of course, talking from a military perspective, from an adversarial perspective. But the battlefield today is very, very different. There are no geographical borders for cognitive warfare. It's global, it's via the internet usually. There are no time limits, it's 24/7. There will be no peace treaties for that. And very importantly, fake news are not required to actually conduct this cognitive warfare, to achieve the aims and goals of this warfare. It can be an embarrassing government document that is hacked from a public website and then or email account, and then it is anonymously leaked into a social media sharing site or selectively to opposition groups, maybe in a social network, and that's sufficient to cause dissension. It can be a social media campaign that inflames the passions of online influencers, and that can cause controversies and go viral, and controversial things do go viral very easily. Social media groups may be motivated to organize demonstrations and to take it to the streets, and then there will be ambiguous public response in these circumstances, and that just adds to the confusion and doubt and entrench conflicting narratives among all different segments of the population. Yes, fake social media accounts and the messaging bots can help, but they're actually not necessary to augment this dynamic. In fact, there is a recent study by MIT and that found that the emotions of surprise and disgust alone make messages go viral. So it's regular users, it's not bots that rapidly resend these messages. Now, this is what it's coming from, but then the mechanisms of its formation. But what are the consequences? And there are a number of consequences. One of them is the so-called, orientation problem. And we can understand this problem through the lens of the so-called double ODA loop, or OODA loop, and that's the cycle of observe, orient, decide, and act. That's developed by military strategist and United States Air Force Colonel John Boyd. According to Boyd, decision-making occurs in the cycle. So you first observe, then you orient, and then you decide and act. And an entity, whether it's an individual or an organization, that can process the cycle very quickly, observe and react to unfolding events more rapidly than the adversary, they can get inside the opponent's decision cycle and gain an advantage. That's the whole idea of this loop. And the loop explains how agile adversaries, how agility in general can overcome raw power in dealing with human opponents. And it is especially applicable to, of course, cybersecurity and cyber warfare. But it is now, this particular framework helps us also to understand commercial operations, learning processes. It's a very important concept in litigation, in business strategy, and law enforcement. And what many people don't understand or kind of misinterpret in this double ODA loop is that it's the loop second O, which is orientation, that subsumes all the other points. Getting orientation wrong, no matter how well or carefully you observe, how quickly you can decide, or how concisely and decisively you can act, means you're caught up in the wrong game. So cognitive warfare, it's important to realize, presents us with an orientation problem. We're disoriented. And another related issue is, our cognitive biases. And that particular understanding comes from the framework by Daniel Kahneman. He's a behavioral economist. He won the Nobel Prize, and he articulated many of his ideas in the book Thinking Fast and Slow. So social media in particular, he argues, can enhance the cognitive biases and in innate decision errors. According to him, our thinking falls into two major categories. One is thinking fast. 95% of our thinking is system one thinking, as he calls it. It's fast, it's instinctive, it's very kind of emotionally driven. And then there is a 5% of thinking, which is system two, and it's slow, it's considered, and it's very much rationally driven. And social media, unfortunately, contributes to these cognitive biases and awakens our minds. Our newsfeeds, think about them, search engines, they serve results and they will typically align with our preferences, right? You see it on Twitter, you see it on YouTube. You're always shown things that YouTube or Twitter believes you would like. And that increases confirmation bias. We interpret this new information, and it's not really new, it's kind of recycled old one. We interpret this new information to confirm our preconceived beliefs. Social media apps rapidly update us users with new information, and that induces what the so-called recency bias. We give more weight to the importance of recent events over those in the past, and I'm guilty as charged. I subscribe to a number of news channels, and the news keeps bumping at you every single second. It's breaking news all the time, and it's very recent. So you tend to think, oh, okay, probably that's more important than anything else. Social networking sites, they induce social proofing. We mimic and affirm other people's actions and beliefs because we want to fit into social groups, right? We're social animals after all. And then we become echo chambers of conformism, groupthink, other cognitive biases. And so this rapid pace of messaging and news release and the perceived news need to sort of quickly react to them and share them probably encourages us thinking fast, reflexively and emotionally, as opposed to thinking slow, as we should be thinking in most cases, in a rational and discerning way. What I notice is that even reputable news outlets now will post emotional headlines, and that encourages viral diffusion of their news articles. And as a result of that all, unfortunately, we spend less and less time on reading the content. We're really very, very quick to share it, even without sometimes thinking, well, okay, is it true? Is it misinformation? What am I actually sharing? And that so we increase the frequency of sharing, even though we don't necessarily read the content in a lot of depth. Now, social media systems are pretty much optimized to distribute very short snippets of information. A 1 minute snippet, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 220, I think is probably the largest on some social media websites. And that often omits all the important context and nuance and understanding other people's motives and their values. Just impossible to do it in such a short period of time. And that can facilitate the spread of information, misinformation rather, both intentionally and unintentionally. So let me just very quickly summarize where we've been so far. I think that there is a war out there, many of you will agree, and it's human brains and minds, yours, mine, are under attack. You, unfortunately, are not only the target or victim of all of that, you can be a weapon and you need to be careful. Cognitive warfare is the most advanced form of manipulation seen today. Technology, hyperconnectivity, proliferation of data and information make us humans very vulnerable. And the ultimate objective of that all is to undermine trust in underlying institutions and individuals as well. And all these NBIC technologies pave the way to further manipulation of the brain. So our main goal as humans should be to protect our decision-making processes. So what can you do? What are the kind of steps that you can take to protect yourself from all of that? I think a lot of it has to do with awareness and acceptance. Accept that there are two realities. One of my favorite analysts, Catherine Austin Fitts, says, there are two realities right now, official reality and reality. And I would probably add to that cognitive warfare stimulates contributes to us living in this official reality. If you're making decisions based on this official reality, particularly financial decisions and health decisions, then you will be hurt. So be aware of that. Be aware that cognitive warfare is underway. So observe and orient, absorb information, and analyze and process it before acting. Learn how to think slow, understand your own biases. Disengage from social media and mainstream media. Don't take sides. Don't get into fights. Don't become a weapon of cognitive warfare yourself. Don't fall for groupthink. Don't get emotional. Don't fuel the conflict. It's really very, very important. And finally, that's my probably best advice is find alternative media. There's a lot of very good citizen journalism and investigative journalism going on. And probably you can share your comments at the end of this video on my site, on YouTube site, whether you have all these alternative media, what are preferred ones. And maybe we can all share and see where we can go for all these alternative sources of news and information in this information overload time. Well, this is all for today. Thank you for joining. And I'll see you next Friday at 2 p.m. Dubai time, right? And now a little bit of music.